Hi, welcome back to Seeking Time. I'm Jessie Gutsu. I'm the functional medicine dietitian behind Seeking Time. It's a food preservation blog, and I love gardening just like the next person, but sometimes preserving your harvest can be really overwhelming. Today, we're going to talk about how to freeze rhubarb without blanching and without sugar. So, first, let's get started on how we pick rhubarb. You want to make sure you get nice and close to where the stalk meets the earth and pull gently upwards. You don't want to twist too much, and you definitely don't want to cut the stalk. Cutting the stalk can open those cells and introduce potential bacteria, causing the plant to not be healthy. So you really want to get those outside roots, stalks that are about a foot long or so, give or take, and open up the space so that the smaller rhubarb stalks can start to grow. You should be able to harvest rhubarb 2 to 3 times in a season. I live in zone 6. And you want to make sure when your plant is younger, you do be a little bit more conservative. Leave a few more of your stalks, and then you can get a little bit more aggressive as the time goes. Always leaving stalks on the plant though, even through the end of the season. So rhubarb, like I said, is actually a vegetable. It's a very tart vegetable. To me, it's sort of reminiscent of the combination between celery and an apple and a tart cherry. So like celery stick in texture, and then a little bit like a Granny Smith apple or a tart cherry in taste. It's really good. Oftentimes we use it in sweet applications, but it can actually most definitely be used in savory as well. So, like I said, you want to make sure you pull close to the edge, and then all we're going to do is cut off these leaves. I'm sure you've heard before, the leaves are poisonous. If you eat enough of them, they contain oxalic acid, which is a considered an anti-nutrient, and so could bind to various minerals and not allow you to absorb those minerals. So you don't want to eat the stalk, or excuse me, you don't want to eat the leaf. You're going to put those in your compost, and we'll just get chopping. So now that I have my stalks washed, I'm going to cut off those ends that are a little bit less appealing. And then now, I did mention you don't have to blanch rhubarb, and that's because they're so highly acidic and they also have lower enzymatic activity. So, what blanching is you put generally a vegetable, sometimes a fruit, into boiling water for just a brief period, say seconds to a couple of minutes, and then pull it out and put it into a quick ice bath to stop the cooking process. What this does is it stops the enzymatic activity. Remember, plants are living things. So you want to make sure that you're preserving your plants as soon as you harvest them for the highest quality and highest nutrition, but you also tend to blanch them so that you can slow that enzymatic activity that causes slow decay, even being in the freezer. So in this case, though, you don't have to blanch rhubarb. Instead, you can just freeze it as is. We are going to, after we've washed them, dry them really well and cut them into the shape or size and quantity that you intend to use them in. So some of my favorite things to make with rhubarb are, of course, baked goods. I love a rhubarb cookie, a rhubarb muffin, a rhubarb crisp. Those are some of my favorites. I make rhubarb ferments or sometimes a more savory application like rhubarb and chicken or rhubarb and carrots. You can do a lot of different things, but the important thing is to remember that when you freeze your rhubarb, and this goes for any time you freeze a food that you're preserving, is you want to make sure that it's cut in a way that is conducive to the way that you plan to use it, so the recipe that you intend to use it for, and in the quantity. It's really important. It really makes the process easier. You grab a bag, you use the contents, you throw the bag away or reuse, whatever your container is. And that way you don't have to thaw too much and then think about how you're going to use the rest of it up. So I am going to prepare, I love to make a rhubarb strawberry smoothie, one of our favorites. And so I'm actually going to chop these in bigger chunks and we'll go to freeze them sort of in like rough chops because the blender will tend to make them really creamy as is. So we'll just go a few inches here. Now, when it comes to freezing for a smoothie, I'm going to make a few smoothies probably in the span of a few weeks. And so I'm less concerned about the quantity because it'll stay in the freezer. And so in this case, I have probably enough for 2 or 3 smoothies. I try to get a good cup of veggies into every smoothie. And so we're going to use this quantity here. And I'm going to get my vacuum sealer out. I do think the best way you should pack your freezer contents is in a vacuum sealer. It'll keep the longest. It pulls all that air out. And so there's less oxygen to deteriorate your food. So let's get that out. So here I have some rhubarb that has been individually frozen on a sheet pan with parchment paper. I always recommend high water content foods like plants, like fruits and vegetables, be frozen individually on a sheet pan with parchment first so that they easily release and also so that when you go to pull them out of the bag, they're not just one giant clump. That's what happens when food is too wet and it hasn't frozen individually. So much easier to deal with when it has frozen well. So I'm just going to envelope this. We'll toss it in the bag and freeze it. So you can definitely waste more bag by being chintzier with the headspace here. As you can see, I have a fair amount of headspace and I have tried to limit that headspace to a degree and I find I don't get as good of a seal. So I use a little bit extra ultimately to save my food and save cost in the end. Now I'm going to write on this what I'm going to use it for. So I have here what it is when I froze it and in what quantity. I can clearly see there my raisin size pieces, which I use for my rhubarb cookies, but I don't always know how much is in a package. I write that on there so I know exactly what to grab, so I know how many recipes I can make with my frozen rhubarb. There you have it. You can freeze rhubarb without blanching and without sugar. And there's lots of other ways to use rhubarb besides just in sweet applications. Some other ideas for you that are less sweet are things like my fermented rhubarb, which is a really nice, slightly crunchy texture, and you get some spices because I add a lot of yumminess to it, and you get good probiotics. You can make a rhubarb chutney that you can put over various meats like good poultries, and you can roast it with veggies. Now, there's a really nice balance between the acidity of this and like some of the more savory veggies like a carrot or even a squash. So get creative, start using your favorite and almost first spring harvest veggie, the rhubarb. I hope to see you at the next video. Tell me your thoughts in the comments below and don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you're interested in more food preservation, it's my favorite topic, head over to seekingtime.com. Thanks again.